Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 6 of the Commerce Extension series. Today's topic is Headless Commerce Extension to the Commerce SDK. My name is Peggy, and I'll be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days, and all registrants will receive a notification when the recording is available. If you have questions to the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions during today's event, and there will be time at the end for further questions. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Luke Graham, Senior Software Engineer, Sergey Pikulia, Software Engineer, and Yegor Denisov, Principal Architect. Luke, over to you.
Thanks, Peggy. I'll get us started today and just run through the agenda briefly, and then I'll jump into a discussion about the sealing of CRT services in the Commerce SDK. After that, I'll throw it over to Sergey for a demo of the VS Code development and debugging experience for CSU extensions in the Commerce SDK. And after that, Sergey will also show a demo of the sealed in-store CSU installer. And after that, we'll go over to Yegor for an overview of CSUCore and all of the benefits of that migration. Following that, we'll quickly go through some of the key takeaways from this session and the series overall, followed by a question and answer session at the end. Okay, starting with the sealing of CRT services. Some background on this is in the retail SDK, the CRT services assemblies were available in the references folder, and there were some extensions that took a direct dependency on these services classes. Even though it was against best practices, it was a pretty easy mistake to make, and it led to a lot of backwards compatibility issues in the past, and caused problematic updates for customers. So as a part of the Commerce SDK, we sought to address this issue by only exposing the messages assemblies for the services. As a result, only the requests and response classes are available in the Commerce SDK. And so we appreciate that this may introduce some additional migration work as extensions move to the Commerce SDK, but we think the benefits far outweigh the one-time cost there. So these benefits being significantly improved backwards compatibility, and no more issues like when we had to switch the CRT services to all be async, or when we have to change the target framework for the services. So big improvements on backwards compatibility and a much more seamless update experience. It also helped to enable us to move to ASP.NET Core CSU. So going forward, we're going to jump into some strategies to address these migration challenges, starting with the not handled response. The not handled response works by having the request handler return a response that is of type not handled response, which signifies to the CRT runtime that the request handler did not process the response, and the runtime will then execute the next handler that's registered for that request type. This approach is very useful to run a custom handler only in certain conditions. For example, the one shown on the right here, where we only want to use RTS customer search if the remote customer search location is set on the request. Otherwise, we return the not handled response to enable the Azure Services customer search to execute. The next important strategy for removing services dependencies is execute next async. And this works by calling the execute next async method on the request handler. This will trigger the runtime to run the next registered request handler for the request. And you can see on the right here, it also gives us the opportunity to get a handle on the response from that handler, and then continue to modify that response as needed with the custom logic. For example, in this case, updating the extension properties. So the big difference here where execute next thrives is that it allows us to modify the response if needed, whereas that's not possible with the not handled response strategy I showed previously. With that, I will toss it over to Sergey for the CSU development and debugging demo.
Thank you, Luke. Let me share my screen. So right now we'll go through process of development experience. We'll see how we can create extension for scale unit. Scale unit will be deployed locally, and we'll see how we can debug it. First step, we will need to clone the repository from GitHub. Let's do that. So first, navigate to GitHub. I will select branch 934. Now we will clone it. Okay, we have cloned it. The next step is to download base sealed installer from LCS website. So we can go to LCS. Dataset library. Retail self-service package. And here the list of available base installers. Right now, I'm interested in this one, Commerce Scale Unit Sealed. Please pay attention that there are sort of two versions. One is sealed, another one is not sealed. This one I'm highlighting right now corresponds to current or legacy, as we call it internally, installer. And that's sort of previous generation, which is connected to SDK, to existing SDK version. And this installer needs to be used with this new sealed extension SDK. So I will download this one. And once it is downloaded, I will need to put it in the folder download of just cloned repository. Okay. So we copy it to it was scale unit SRC. Here we have download folder. I just put it here. So this is the only action I have done since I cloned this repository. Now I will open Visual Studio Code. And next step will be open folder. I will select the folder of just cloned repository. And before I proceed, I wanted to say a couple of words about Visual Studio versus Visual Studio Code. So we keep supporting Visual Studio, I mean regular Visual Studio. Why I'm emphasizing on Visual Studio Code? That's because if we use Visual Studio Code for this development experience, we have the easiest, most automated way to see how these extensions work in action. So I mainly don't need to do almost anything, and it will just work with minimum amount of effort. Before I continue, I want to emphasize that we have two modes of scale unit hosted in this local environment. First mode is, we call it self-host. This is lightweight version of host process for retail server, which contains the same binaries corresponding to CRT engine, to retail server host runtime. The difference with full installation, we call it IS-based, is that self-host version is not capable of interacting with, let's say, real-time service calls. It means that HQ is not required for the interactions. Also, it doesn't require a SYN client. Basically, this is very lightweight version of retail server, which should not be used for fully functional retail server, but rather for debugging, quickly debugging extensions. So if you are seeking for a retail server with complete functionality, you should be using IS-based, Internet Information Services-based retail server. But if you need quick way to find out how your extension work, or for instance, if you need to quickly test your extension, let's say you have trigger or handler or controller action, this localhost flavor is pretty much suitable for this. So I'm currently displaying configuration file which directs this environment to use either self-host or IS-based deployment. By default, we offer self-host, and then next step would be to select this combo box and make sure that you have debug with self-host selected. Once this is done, we just hit F5 on the keyboard. And what happens now, a number of prerequisites are being checked. Then once prerequisites are satisfied, on my box, everything was, all prerequisites we already installed, but if you will do it on the environment which sort of new, like let's say brand new Windows installation, you'll be presented with actionable, at least we hope many will find them actionable errors outlining what exactly is wrong and what should be steps to remediate it. Like for instance, you might have MS build of expected version or some packages and so on, so those errors will direct you. Now we can see that compilation process completed, and right now deployment process is in progress. So it consists of two parts. First, this process installs so-called base product, the one we downloaded from LCS like a few minutes ago. And then it will continue installing extensions on top of this base installation. Right now we can see database is being installed. By the way, there are several diagnostics login modes, and right now we are employing the most verbose one. That's why we see so many output activity. This is useful when you do it like first time, or it depends. If you want all the details, you can use verbose. If you don't need details, you might supply flag which will say do not use, just use informational or errors only, for instance. So database creation is in progress. This is channel database, by the way. Okay, now next step is, as we can see from this log, is actually prior deploying extension. We deploy demo data. Demo data is just set of SQL-based data residing in specific tables which are needed for certain handlers to work. This is required for self-host only and not for regular IS-based deployment. Okay, this log is already runtime logs, and they indicate initialization of the retail server. Okay, and here you can see that result of installation. This, as we can guess, indicates success. This regular health check endpoint. What we can do, we can send another request, like to render OData metadata. So this is a regular interface which you will see on any retail server. And we can call methods corresponding to retail server base installation, for instance, get environment configuration, I believe. Yeah, so this shows environment configuration. And now we can also execute extension method, like simple pin get, which was, let's look at the sources. Commerce runtime, controllers, unbound controller. So this one is residing in here. And by the way, while I execute request here, the logs in this console, debug console output reflect what is going on at runtime. This is pretty useful while debugging extensions. Like for instance, you might mistakenly in your client specify wrong URL, including run controller or action, or you misapplying parameters, and you will see debug information here. It is easier to find errors sooner. What we can do now is let's create one more action. So what I will do, I will stop debugger, and let's create another action. This one will let's call it get2, and let's return current daytime. Okay, so now I saved it, and now I am again hitting F5 on the keyboard. So this process will compile the required, and it will also check if base installer is already installed or not. If it is not installed, it will install it. And then on top of this base installer, it will install extension. And we should see this method in action. Okay, installation completed. Now runtime is initializing. Okay, now let's try this new method which we just introduced. Commerce get2. So it displays current time, as you can see, each time I refresh it. And now we can put breakpoint here. And now when I execute it again, breakpoint is hit. I'm waiting for this window to refresh. Waiting for Visual Studio Code to respond. Okay, yeah, debugger point was hit. So essentially we can debug the stuff, whatever method you might have here. For now, we'll let it go. So execution continues. And as you can see, all this information is displayed here. By the way, one of additional characteristics of self-host is it leverages HTTP, not HTTPS. That's because we do not require SSL certificate. This is again to simplify deployment. It of course doesn't match to real topologies, which should never use HTTP in production, but it is still pretty convenient for local and quick deployment debugging. So we have just modified extension. Now let's see how this looks in remove programs, how all this is seen there. So if I type this commerce, this is quick, easy way to find it. We see two installed products like scale unit base installation, the one which we downloaded from LCS. And this one is we just built in front of you by using this Visual Studio Code. I want to emphasize that this commerce scale unit, this base installation, it is never modified. So this is the one big difference between legacy approach and new approach. When in legacy approach, customers were required to build entire package, which was composing not just customers' extensions, but also the base code provided by Microsoft. And this is no longer the case with this new sealed SDK approach. This commerce scale unit represents base module, which is always shipped by Microsoft, never is built by customer, and the customer is only responsible for building these extensions. So we can now look how this looks at file system. Files. Microsoft Dynamics 10. So this is a folder. By the way, big distinguishing sign between legacy and new sealed installer is this number. For sealed we use 10.0, for legacy it was 7.0. So here's the folder structure. It contains setup files, which basically it still speaks for itself. It's setup files which are required for these deployments. Then we see folder dedicated to Microsoft-based installer. It always contains the code. Again, it's aligned with what I said earlier. It always contains code and artifacts provided by Microsoft. And all customers' extensions go into separate folder. And this folder contains another subfolder which will match extension name. So when extension is being deployed, there is no any modification to this Microsoft folder at all, which brings us number of positive changes, positive opportunities. For instance, we can replace base installer without touching extension, and vice versa. We can deploy new extensions without touching base product. This reduces amount of moving parts, if you will, which will mitigate or reduce risks when something goes wrong. Like you don't have to reinstall the whole product, you just reinstalling or upgrading only one extension. With that, I will conclude this part of the demo, which involves Visual Studio Code, and let's move to another flavor of installation, which we call IS-based. So IS-based meaning Internet Information Services hosted retail server. Here we have configuration file where we have to provide number of parameters, like which were not required for self-host. But for IS, since IS it is sort of real full deployment, everything should be provided, like which is outlined here, including port number. This is SSL port, which will be used for your website on IS, and number of certificates. One thing I want to talk about, big difference between these new sealed installers and legacy, is that if you dealt previously with legacy RSSU installer, you probably remember you were responsible for providing secrets to the installer, secrets corresponding to Azure Active Directory application. That caused a number of difficulties, especially when those secrets expired. And also it imposed greater risk, I would say, because you had to provide really secret to the installer. There is no risk in terms of leaking your secret with Microsoft, but still, the less you touch the secret, the better. So in new sealed installer, we replaced secrets with certificates, which they have to be pre-installed by customer on the box. And this means that installer now has nothing to do with secrets, neither with installation of these certificates. Customers could install certificates by any script with a manually or automated, then can replace them, and we provide way in these sealed installers to replace certificates. So let's see how we can provide parameters here. By the way, before proceeding, we need to uninstall this self-hosted version of ETL server, because self-hosted and IaaS-based cannot be hosted on the same box. To do that, we can have many options. First, we can do it from here by just clicking on Install button. And another option is to do it from command from this UI. For instance, I will use this terminal, and we provide several out-of-the-box commands where they, I hope, self-describing. I will use this uninstall one. So it uninstalls extension and then base product. Now, if we look into these installed products, we don't see Commerce anymore because it was uninstalled. So now let's move to IaaS-based installation. I will set this parameter to false. Now I will specify port. You can specify any port you want for this deployment. And I prepared a number of parameters, like I will use them in my helper document. So first is async client certificate. Async client is here. I know that for this demo I'm using the same certificate for ETL server as well, so I will put it here. And one more certificate is related to SSL. So it is specific per box. I have created it earlier, and now I'm providing here. Now we have to provide few Azure Active Directory application IDs, which also have to be created prior all this process. On GitHub, we have README file which explains how to create all this. So async client application. Async client app ID is this one. I will provide it here. Also, I know I'm using the same application for ETL server for this demo. And for Cloud POS, I use dedicated application as well. It is seen over here. Okay. Now one more parameter, ID resource server ID, which is required for ID authentication. And again, all this is documented how to do it on our GitHub README file. And finally, I need to provide path to the configuration file, which you normally download from IX for SSU installers. This file corresponds to channel database. I already downloaded it prior this session on my box and stored it here. So I'm going to move it into download folder. The same folder which contains this base setup file. And I need to provide the name in this parameter. The name will be, okay. So here we specified already false for self-host, and we provided all the parameters. Now, last step is to specify IS debug here. Now we again click F5. And the same process will take place again. Base installer as well as extension will be compiled, including prerequisite checks, and then IS-based installation will start. And on top of that installation, we will have extension installed. By the way, if you open my IS website, we can watch the process. I mean, you see so far there is no any other website than default one. And now installation is in progress. This one will take a little bit longer because it employs number of additional components installation, including async client and including IS Internet Information Services activities like website and web application creation. That was SQL part. SQL part completed fast because it didn't detect any changes comparing to already installed database. Now we can see the installer makes ping request to make sure health check completes successfully, because deployment is considered completed successfully only if health check passes. So now we have this browser open for us, and this time you can see it was navigated to a folder under IS. And if you look into from Internet Services, we can see this website. This new website was created. There's application, couple of websites and couple of applications like POS and retail server. And I also want to emphasize one thing about this CRT RSSU installer. Comparing to legacy installer and comparing to legacy SDK, this new thing, it uses ASP.NET Core rather than regular ASP.NET. Igor will speak more about this in details. So now we have health check opened. And as previously, let's test the simple ping get, and we can see it is also hit. Now, debugging process. As you can see, we automatically pop up the list of running processes, and in this case, we want to attach debugger to W3 WP process, which corresponds to IS. To do that, we need to search process we are interested in this list. So we hit just W, and you can see, in my case, I have just one process, but in your case, you might have many. How to distinguish across them? Like, just look at this parameter. It says CSUCore. This is the name of application pool, which can also be seen in here in IS. That's the application pool which is used by this website. And then we just hit, we click that UI element. And the same as before, we navigate to method, breakpoint. And once I refresh this page, Visual Studio breakpoint was hit. And so you can debug it the same way. So this, yeah, if you look into this UI, you can see again that both of these were installed. Scale unit base and scale unit extension. You will not see difference in this UI between self-host and not self-host, but on file system, difference will be Like in case of retail server self-host, this folder would be named retail server self-host. And in case of regular one, you just see retail server here. Again, we don't expect you to deal much or deal at all ideally with anything under Microsoft. Anything, if you will have to deal with, is inside extension only. And deal with meaning you could just observe what files were deployed here and so on. By the way, quick note about extension configuration file. So each extension, it has number of artifacts, and one of them is this configuration file. I believe you know very well what this extension is. Just as you can see, name is different, and we also changed the way extensions are composed. In Legacy SDK, you had to outline extension composition in both retail server web config as well as in bin ext configuration file. In this new approach, we have just single configuration file which contains extension for both, for retail server and CRT. In my case, it is single assembly because it contains both controller for retail server and specific CRT handlers, but if you have different assemblies, they would appear here. Now I want to see how much time, I hope I will have some time to show you how we can run the same installation, but from the command line outside of Visual Studio Code. So I will basically close this window. What I suggest we do now, we uninstall this product from UI. By the way, I want to show you how to investigate possible issues with deployment. If you hit, let's say, this button, or if you try to uninstall from command line and something goes wrong, we provide very detailed logs which are located in well-known location, and you could either analyze the log yourself or send it to us. We try to make this log very, very verbose and very specific, so this one additional difference compared to legacy installer, where I would say these logs are more verbose. One point is, if I click on install right now, it fails. So let's see why it fails. To locate the log, we go to C, program data, Microsoft 10 logs, and here we can see just order by latest folder and include name of this product which you wanted to uninstall. In this case, it was Commerce Scale Unit, and I can see Commerce Scale Unit here. So if you click on this file, it is basically installation log. Let's see why uninstall has failed. It says in the following extension scale, blah, 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 depends on this product. Uninstall it first and try again. So what this means? It means that I tried to install base installer without uninstalling extension. And we don't want to leave system in not supported state when you have extension but no installer. That's why we prevent that. If you would like to refresh, upgrade new version, that would be allowed, but literally uninstalling base installer without uninstalling extension first is not allowed. So to rectify it, I will uninstall extension first. Okay, and only now I will install this base installer. So it's gone. Now let's see how we can deploy this from command line without Visual Studio Code. So I have this helper I prepared. It's a command line which is also documented. By the way, we have community article which is available at this URL, which explains what sealed installers are and how to deal with them if you need some extra information in addition to official public documentation published by our team. We keep upgrading our documents but sometimes we have articles which contain some more fresher information than formal documents. Formal, I mean under docs.microsoft.com. So what I will do, I will navigate to the folder where I downloaded my installer. I actually copied it into different locations, so let's copy it again. Repository. Scale unit, SRC, download. I will copy this base installer and I will move it into here. Now we will execute this command. And the same happens, you can see the same log which we have seen inside Visual Studio Code. Essentially, Visual Studio Code just orchestrates around all the required parameters you need to supply, and it is purposed to simplify deployment, especially when you are only getting familiarize yourself with this new SDK and installers. These installers have a bunch of options. I will just speak about few, but you can use help option in base installer to see all available. Like for instance, you can skip URL check, you can skip credentials check, you can skip requirement for full text search if your database doesn't support it. Production scenario requires it, but scenario which might be used for development don't require it. So as you can see, it just finished installation without opening any browsers, which is by design, since this is simple installation, no any orchestration on top of that. Let's go quickly through this log. It contains some useful pieces, like for instance, these URLs for just deployed health retail server. We can just open it in our browser and it responds to successful installation. Luke, I want a reality check. Do I still have like 7-10 minutes, or we better do extra in different session?
I think it's best if we do the extra in a different session.
Okay.
Got about 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So here we just finished installing this base installer. Now let's install extension. If you look into our add remove programs again, we should see the just base installer. Since I know I already compiled extension previously, I will just go to that folder. Previously means when we had this session with Visual Studio Code. So binary is located in this folder, and to run it, I simply supply install verb. Okay, installation. So what I just did, I just installed extension on top of base installer. Now we can see it appeared here. And if I now query Commerce simple ping get, I should see that extension in action. So we can see it works. So we just went through 2 ways installing extensions, by using Visual Studio Code and by using command line. In next sessions, we might cover more scenarios, for instance, deploying multiple extensions. This concludes the demo. Yegor, over to you.
Thank you, Sergey. So in the last part of this meeting, I'd like to go over CSUCore, which is a Commerce Scale unit, and Core is a brand name, if you will, for a new flavor of it. It is using latest .NET runtime versions and ASP.NET Core, as well as all data frameworks. CSUCore is also used as a base for new development experience that Sergey just presented. It is available starting 10.22, which is version 9.32 of Scale unit. Between versions 9.32 and 9.35, it is based on .NET Core 3.1 runtime, and starting 9.36, aka 10.026, it will be based on .NET 6 runtime. Now let's talk about rollout of CSUCore. Very soon, CSUCore will become default for all new environments. For existing environments, we are starting to roll it out on selected environments where we see that all extensions are compatible, and we can benefit from the performance benefits the most. Eventually, as old SDK is going to be phased out, and as we get more and more maturity in the CSUCore, we will phase out current version of CSU in favor of CSUCore. In terms of performance, we have rolled it out to numerous environments, both internal and external facing, including AdventureWorks website, which is a demo website for our e-commerce storefront. And based on the testing we've done so far, we see 50th percentile to 95th percentile to be improved anywhere between 30 to 40%. These testings were done on version 9.34 and are still based on .NET Core 3.1. We expect even better performance improvements as we roll out .NET 6 versions. Now let's talk about prerequisites, or what it will take for you to upgrade to CSUCore or to migrate to CSUCore and benefit from the improvements there. First of all, to make it easier for you to verify or to evaluate whether your environment is compatible with CSUCore, we rolled out new health check test called extensions, and we are going to keep adding more compatibility checks to it. The current version can check how many extension assemblies you have that target incompatible .NET framework targets. So, for example, on this screenshot, you see that the lines that are marked as red indicate number of incompatible extensions for each of the target framework. The new SDK is one of the prerequisites for CSUCore because it essentially guarantees compatibility with all the requirements and prerequisites we have for it. For example, we have embedded build type checks to ensure you only target compatible .NET targets like .NET Standard 2.0. And if you try to compile your extension with a target that cannot be run in a CSUCore runtime, it would fail the build. Now, it is still possible to have an environment that is compatible with CSUCore, even if you use the old SDK, but you have to be very diligent when you and pay attention to warnings when you compile your deployable package. For example, the things you need to take care of is warnings that says you're not targeting .NET Standard 2.0, or if you are still using async non-async interfaces for your CRT extensions like request handlers and request triggers, or if your controllers are based on Commerce controller instead of iController interface. In the future releases, we are gonna also mark non-async CRT APIs as obsolete, and we'll give you some time to migrate from them. But I would encourage you to do so sooner than later, because you will have performance benefits from migrating to async APIs as starting 10.022, all our internal APIs are already async, and all the business logic has been moved to async flows. I believe that's it on my side. If you have questions about CSUCore, please submit it in the Q&A section, and I'll give microphone back to Luke.
Thanks, Igor. I will move things along, and we'll wrap things up with some key takeaways from today and from the series in general. Starting with CSU self-hosted mode, which is a great tool for extension-focused development. But just a reminder that it's not meant as a functional replacement of the IIS-hosted CSU. If you're doing complete end-to-end testing of POS or e-commerce scenarios, typically in that case, we'll want to use the full Internet Information Services hosted Commerce Scale unit. And Sergey showed how to debug and develop for both of those versions of CSU. Moving on to the sealed installers, both the IIS hosted and the self-host and sealed installers use the ASP.NET Core CSU that has all of the great performance benefits that Yegor just mentioned. And just overall, we would highly recommend moving to the Commerce SDK and the sealed installers as soon as possible to get the benefits with the simpler extension development experience, smoother packaging and deployment, and seamless upgrade experience that comes along with it. And even if you don't believe you're ready to migrate right now, we still believe it's worth evaluating and starting to plan for that process for the significant benefits that we've outlined in this series. So once again, Commerce SDK is kind of a prerequisite, and it really enables the .NET Core CSU compatibility, which will lead to 30 to 50% performance improvements, as Yegor mentioned, depending on the API and the scenario. And moving on to just some procedural stuff, please use the GitHub repos to open issues and ask questions about the Commerce SDK. We're monitoring all of these repos, and it's a great way to provide feedback and as well find answers for common questions for the SDK and the samples. It's all indexed by search engines, so it should show up in your favorite search engine of choice if the issues have been asked previously. And this way we can start to kind of build off of all the other questions that have already been asked and answered, and really simplify and improve the development experience there. Another kind of bookkeeping note here, the retail components will be removed from the IS development machines in a future release. Nothing imminent on that front yet, just early heads up to be prepared and to be familiar with the sealed installer development experience that Sergey demonstrated today. as in the future that will be the primary way to develop for Commerce. And lastly, the last release for the Retail SDK will be 10.32. We've reevaluated and we've pushed it back a couple of releases from what was previously communicated. But even though this Retail SDK will be around for a little bit longer, we still highly encourage all customers to migrate to the Commerce SDK as soon as possible. There are just a few gaps that we need to fill first, so unless blocked, it's highly recommended to go to the Commerce SDK as soon as possible. With that, I will jump over to Q&A. Let's see if we have any questions here. All right, it says, how do we refresh a cloud-hosted DevBox DB from a UAT backpack file when using CSU instead of just the SQL DB on the DevBox, where the UAT environment has CSU? Sergey, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that question.
I'm reading through it right now. So how do you refresh cloud-hosted DevBox? So it seems like question is about cloud-hosted DevBox, and I assume it's about cloud-hosted DB rather than locally hosted DB. So this process, which we demonstrated today, it is not replacing what is available today for cloud deployments. This process, what we demonstrated today, meant to be used on when everything is local, including database. So database would be installed on your box where you run these installers. And in order to refresh from UAT backpack, or maybe I misunderstood the question. How to refresh? Yeah, if it is about cloud hosted, literally as it's written in the question, then it's the same process which applies to cloud deployment. But if it is about cloud, how to get a UAT backpack from cloud hosted and apply it to this dev environment which we just represented, we would need to publish set of steps for that. We don't have them published yet. So I will take a note and we will act on that.
Perfect. Thanks, Sergey. All right. With that, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So I think Peggy will toss it back to you to wrap things up.
All right, thank you so much, Luke. So if the attendees could have a look in the live event Q&A, I've posted a link to a short survey. We would love your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. So we really do appreciate your participation in that survey. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. All attendees will receive a link to that recording as soon as it's ready. So with that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our wonderful presenters and our audience for joining. Have a great day or evening wherever you are.